In the fall of 1979, a respected state trooper left home for his night shift, but he never came back. Hours later, another officer found his patrol car sitting on the side of a dark rural road. The engine was still running. The lights were still flashing. His hat, his radio, even his notebook were sitting neatly inside. But the trooper himself, gone. No blood, no gunfire, no signs of a struggle. It was as if he had stepped out of his cruiser and simply vanished into the night. For years, detectives searched rivers, forests, and abandoned buildings. They found nothing. Rumors exploded. Was it an ambush, a kidnapping? Or did he live a double life and run away? Families begged for answers. The case went cold. Then, 15 years later, construction workers broke into an old sealed tunnel near the highway. What they found inside shocked everyone. Bones in uniform, a badge, a gun, and clues that revealed the trooper's final hours. This is the chilling story of how one officer disappeared without a trace, and why it took 15 years for the truth to finally surface. Make sure you like this video, subscribe for more true crime stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. In 1979, people in a small town trusted one man more than anyone else, their state trooper. He was known as a steady hand in chaos. If there was a crash, he showed up first. If there was a fight, he broke it apart without anger. He didn't yell. He didn't lose his cool. At home, he was the same, a family man. He had a wife who adored him and kids who thought he was a hero. He made it to school events when he could. He worked long shifts, but he always came home with a smile. Neighbors waved when he passed by in his patrol car. Farmers would stop him on back roads just to talk for a minute. Everyone felt safer when he was around. He wasn't just a cop. He was part of the community. People said, if something happens, call him. But being a trooper in 1979 wasn't easy. Crime was rising. Drugs were moving in. He often dealt with dangerous people who didn't want to see him again. Still, he never showed fear. That fall, he went on duty one evening like always. He said goodbye to his wife, kissed his kids, and walked out the door in uniform. None of them knew it would be the last time they'd see him alive. That night, he climbed into his patrol car and drove out to the highway. The shift started quiet, just miles of road stretching into darkness. A little after 10 p.m., he checked in over the radio. His voice was calm, steady, nothing unusual. He mentioned pulling off near a lonely stretch, a place where truckers sometimes parked. Dispatch logged the call. To them, it was just another update, routine, but it would be the last time anyone ever heard his voice. Not long after, another trooper drove the same road. He spotted the man's patrol car parked on the shoulder. The headlights were on. The engine was still running. He pulled over, expecting to see his fellow officer nearby. But when he looked inside, the driver's seat was empty. His hat was still there, his radio, even his notebook sat on the passenger seat, but the trooper himself was gone. The other officer called it in. Within minutes, backup was rushing to the scene. Something was wrong, very wrong. In the middle of an ordinary shift, on an open highway, a trusted state trooper had simply vanished. The first officer on the scene walked slowly toward the cruiser. The headlights cut through the night, beams stretching across the empty road. The engine hummed, steady and low, like the car had been abandoned only seconds earlier. He leaned inside. The driver's seat was empty. The trooper's hat lay on the dash. His radio was clipped neatly in place. His notebook, the one he used for every traffic stop, sat open on the passenger seat. Everything looked normal, except the man was missing. The officer circled the car, shining his flashlight into the weeds along the road. No blood, no footprints, no sign of a struggle, just silence. He keyed his radio and called dispatch. His voice was tight. He didn't say it outright, but everyone listening knew something was very wrong. Within minutes, more troopers arrived. They checked the surrounding fields, ditches, and trees. Nothing. The car sat like a ghost, its lights still piercing the dark. This wasn't a trooper stepping away to stretch his legs. This wasn't someone walking off into the night. Something had happened here. Word spread quickly. Dozens of officers poured into the area. They parked along the highway, their red and blue lights flashing in the distance. Radios crackled nonstop. They fanned out in every direction. Some searched the woods, others followed dirt paths. Helicopters were called in. Dogs sniffed the fields, but there was no trace. It was like the man had vanished into thin air. Back at the station, phones rang off the hook. The dispatcher who logged his last call replayed it again and again. His voice had sounded calm. Nothing in it hinted at danger. Neighbors left their houses to join the search. Men carried flashlights. Women stood on porches, whispering about what might have happened. Kids were told to stay inside. Then the family arrived. His wife demanded answers. His children cried, asking why their dad's car was there but he was. Troopers tried to comfort her, but none of them had words. They were shaken themselves. This wasn't a missing citizen. This was one of their own. By dawn, searchers were exhausted, but nothing had been found. The cruiser still sat on the side of the road, headlights fading as the battery died. A uniformed trooper had disappeared, and nobody knew how. The moment word spread that a trooper had gone missing, the search began, and it began big. Helicopters were rushed into the air, their spotlights cutting through the darkness like giant white swords. They circled the countryside, sweeping across fields, roads, and the thin patches of woods. But no matter how wide they stretched the light, the beams never found him. On the ground, search dogs were unloaded from police trucks. Their handlers clipped on leashes, let the dogs sniff the inside of the cruiser, and then gave the command. Noses pressed to the dirt, the dogs pulled hard, sniffing, tracking, weaving through fields. Officers followed close behind, holding flashlights, hoping the dogs would lead them to something. But every time the trail seemed to break, the dogs would suddenly stop, confused, as if the scent had just ended. Meanwhile, state troopers lined up shoulder to shoulder, flashlights in hand, marching through the woods. The line stretched wide, sweeping across every inch of ground. Leaves crunched under their boots. Radios crackled with updates, each one the same. Nothing yet, no sign of him. Local farmers came out too. Some brought lanterns. Others drove trucks down dirt paths, headlights bouncing off trees. Neighbors left their homes, walking with flashlights, shouting his name into the night. Everyone expected to hear a voice shout back, weak, tired, maybe injured, but the woods gave nothing. Just silence. Hours passed. Midnight turned to 2 a.m. The search only grew more desperate. Helicopters circled lower. Dogs were run back and forth over the same patches of ground, and officers stomped through mud, ditches, and fields. But the officer had vanished as if the earth had swallowed him whole. At the command post, maps were spread across the hood of a patrol car. Senior officers jabbed fingers at roads and fields, directing search teams. Cover this area again. Sweep that drainage ditch. Go back over the field by the highway. Orders went out fast. But even with all the manpower, nothing came back. By 3 a.m., exhaustion was hitting the search teams. Flashlight batteries dimmed. The dogs slowed down, but nobody wanted to stop. The idea of leaving a fellow officer out there, alone, in the cold, was unbearable. Family members stood at the edge of the command post, wrapped in blankets, watching the frantic scene. His wife begged officers to keep looking. His kids clung to her side, crying quietly. Friends from the department promised her again and again, "We're not stopping. We'll find him." But as the night dragged on, those words sounded less certain. Around 4 a.m., officers expanded the search. Creeks were checked. Bridges were scanned. Abandoned barns were opened and swept with flashlights. Still nothing. No footprints. No broken branches. No dropped items. Not even a trail. It didn't make sense. Officers replayed the timeline again and again. He made the traffic stop. He checked in on the radio. Then gone. His car was still running. His hat, radio, and notebook were inside. No struggle, no blood, no tracks, nothing. By sunrise, the search had covered miles in every direction. The helicopters landed, low on fuel. The dogs were loaded back into trucks. Troopers returned to the command post, dirty, exhausted, and empty-handed. Everyone expected the daylight to reveal something the night had hidden. But the sun rose, and still, the ground was bare. It was like the trooper had stepped out of his car and simply disappeared into thin air. By morning, the news had spread everywhere. People in town woke up to hear it on the radio, see it on the morning news, or get a knock on their door from neighbors. A trooper was missing, And not just any trooper, the one everyone trusted. The man who stopped to help people fix flat tires, who waved at kids on their bikes, who showed up at church on Sundays with his family. Now, his patrol car sat abandoned on the side of the road like a ghost. Its engine had gone cold by sunrise, but its presence screamed louder than ever. Everyone who drove past slowed down. Some pulled over, standing quietly with their hands on their hips, staring at the empty car with the hat still resting inside. The scene quickly turned into a gathering point. Farmers left their fields. Shop owners closed their stores. By mid-morning, dozens of locals lined the road, whispering to each other, their faces pale. No one could understand how a uniformed state trooper, armed and trained, could vanish in the middle of his duty. For the community, the fear was instant and deep. If someone could take him, then no one was safe. Mothers held their kids closer. Men shook their heads, whispering to each other that something about this didn't add up. The idea of a random ambush terrified them, but the thought of him just walking away didn't make sense either. He wasn't that kind of man. Reporters showed up next, cameras rolling, microphones in hand. They filmed the cruiser from every angle, asking locals what they thought. People gave the same answers again and again. This doesn't feel real. He was one of the good ones. If they can't find him, how are we supposed to sleep at night? The church bell rang at noon, not for a service but as a call to gather. Inside, neighbors sat in silence, some praying, others simply staring at the floor. His wife and kids sat in the front pew, surrounded by family. The pastor spoke softly, saying the town must have faith, but even his voice cracked with fear. Outside, children who once waved to the trooper on his patrols asked their parents hard questions. Is he coming back? Parents didn't know how to answer. They promised things would be okay, but their own eyes gave away the truth. They were just as scared as their kids. By late afternoon, fear turned to rumors. Some said he had been attacked by someone he pulled over. Others whispered about a possible ambush, maybe even revenge from a criminal he once arrested. A few even said something darker, that maybe he had been taken somewhere far away, hidden so well the police might never find him. The police presence grew as more officers arrived from neighboring towns. They guarded the area, but their faces showed what they really felt: helplessness. They had no leads, no evidence, no answers to give the community. And the longer the silence stretched, the more the fear grew. As the sun dipped low, the abandoned patrol car was finally towed away. But for the people watching, the image of that car sitting on the roadside was burned into their minds. A reminder that a man they all knew, a man they all trusted, had vanished right in front of them. And until he was found, the town itself felt frozen, trapped in a fear that wouldn't let go. Within hours of the trooper's disappearance, investigators from across the state were called in. By sunrise, the quiet roadside was swarming with detectives, patrol officers, and command staff. This was no longer just a missing person call. It was a full-blown law enforcement emergency. Detectives set up a command post near the scene. Maps were unrolled on car hoods. Radios buzzed nonstop. Everyone knew one thing: if a state trooper could vanish on duty, the whole system was at risk. The first order was simple: search everywhere. Teams spread out in all directions. Some walked shoulder to shoulder through tall grass fields, pushing with sticks to check for anything hidden. Others climbed into muddy ditches, shining flashlights for signs of a struggle. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the farmland and rivers nearby. Dogs were brought in to track his scent. Handlers guided them across open pastures, into barns, and along gravel roads. At first, the dogs pulled hard as if they caught a trail. But then, nothing. The scent stopped cold. It was as if the trooper had stepped off the earth. Divers were sent into rivers and ponds. They dragged hooks across the bottom, searching for weapons, clothing, anything. Nothing came up except weeds and mud. Detectives knocked on farmhouse doors, asking residents what they heard or saw that night. A few remembered hearing sirens, but no one had seen the trooper after his last radio call. One man said he noticed flashing lights by the roadside but thought it was a routine stop. Nobody reported a struggle. Nobody reported gunfire. Inside the command post, frustration grew. Normally, an abandoned patrol car would mean a chase, an accident, or foul play. But here there was no crash, no blood, no shell casings. His gun was still in the holster. His hat and notebook were right there in the front seat. Every clue pointed to him simply walking away, but that made no sense. Detectives pulled his recent case files, spreading them across tables. They looked for enemies, people with grudges, criminals who might want revenge. But there were dozens of names and no clear suspect. Every lead was checked. Every lead went nowhere. Some officers searched abandoned barns, convinced he might have been dragged there. Others tore apart ditches with shovels. Still, not a single shoeprint, tire track, or drop of blood appeared. It was as though the night had swallowed him whole. The longer the search went on, the more tense the atmosphere became. Reporters hovered at the edges, asking for statements. Detectives had nothing to give them. Families gathered near the road, hopping for news. All they got was silence. One officer muttered to another, "It's like he just vanished." And that's exactly how it felt. By the end of the first full day, the scene was exhausted. Dozens of detectives, hundreds of hours, miles of ground covered, and they had nothing. No evidence, no witnesses, no answers. The investigation was only just beginning, but already the case had turned into a nightmare. As the hours turned into days, detectives began to split into groups. One group believed the trooper had been ambushed. To them, it was the only explanation that made sense. They argued that someone must have lured him to that stretch of road. Maybe a staged breakdown, maybe a decoy vehicle. The trooper stops, thinking it's routine, but in reality it's a trap. He gets jumped, forced into another car, taken away before he could reach for his weapon. But almost immediately, other detectives pushed back. If it was an ambush, where was the evidence? No tire marks, no scuffle in the dirt, no blood. Nothing was scattered in or around the cruiser. The radio, hat, notebook, all neatly in place. Even his sidearm was still on his belt when he vanished. That fact alone baffled investigators. A trooper under attack would almost certainly draw his weapon. The crime scene felt too clean. That was the problem. An ambush should have left chaos behind. Instead, it looked like the trooper had simply vanished mid-routine. Detectives replayed the last radio call over and over. His voice was calm, measured. No stress. No hint of danger. If someone had approached with bad intentions, surely his tone would have changed. But it hadn't. Still, the ambush theory refused to die. Some investigators believed the attackers could have been professionals. People who knew how to leave no trace. A gang seeking revenge. A hired crew. Maybe even someone trained in law enforcement tactics. That idea terrified everyone. If the attackers were that skilled, it meant the disappearance wasn't random. It was planned, carefully. But again, doubts surfaced. If the goal was to kill him, why wasn't his body left behind? Why take the risk of removing him from the scene? That increased the chances of being spotted. The absence of a body suggested something else was going on. The team debated endlessly. One detective slammed his fist on the hood of a cruiser and said, "None of this adds up. Not a damn thing." Meanwhile, his family watched the news, desperate for answers. Reporters speculated that the case might involve a criminal group. Anchors asked live on television, was this a direct hit on law enforcement? The public grew uneasy. If a uniformed officer could be ambushed on duty and no one caught, what did that mean for ordinary citizens? Fear rippled through the community. But in the command post, reality remained brutal. There was no proof. The ambush theory was built only on possibility, not evidence. Every detective knew theories without evidence were just stories, and stories didn't solve cases. By the end of the week, the frustration was obvious. Some detectives still swore it was an ambush. Others said no way. The case stood at a standstill. The only thing they could all agree on was this. Whatever happened that night, it had been fast. Too fast for anyone to react. Too fast for the trooper to even call for help. And that detail made the case feel darker than ever. As days passed with no answers, detectives decided to do something they rarely did in those years. Bring the family directly into the spotlight. Maybe, they thought, if people saw their pain, someone would finally talk. The trooper's wife sat down in front of cameras. She looked exhausted, her face pale from sleepless nights. She clutched a framed photo of her husband in uniform, his smile frozen in time. Reporters leaned forward as she began to speak. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. She begged anyone with information to come forward. She said her husband was a good man, a loyal officer, a loving father. He would never abandon his family. He would never walk away from his job. She pleaded, "Please, if you know something, say something. We just want him home." Next to her stood their children. They were too young to understand all the details, but they understood one thing. Their father was gone. Each child held up a picture, snapshots of birthdays, Christmas mornings, summer fishing trips. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the innocence of kids who just wanted their dad back. The images hit the public hard. People watching at home cried. News anchors paused, their voices heavy. This wasn't just a missing officer anymore. This was a broken family on display, their pain raw and undeniable. Phone calls flooded the station that night. Some callers offered tips, others just offered prayers. Detectives followed up on every single lead, but again, nothing concrete came out of it. Still, the family's plea made one thing certain. The case was no longer just a police matter. It belonged to the entire community. Neighbors organized vigils. Churches held prayer services. Volunteers offered to search again, even after days of failure. Everywhere, people talked about the trooper. His name was whispered in grocery stores, gas stations, and schools. Parents pointed at the headlines and told their kids, "That man kept us safe. Now we have to find him." The wife returned to television multiple times in the following weeks. Each time, her words carried more desperation. She refused to believe her husband had left willingly. She refused to accept the rumors. Her kids, now more aware, sometimes cried during the broadcasts. Reporters didn't turn the cameras away. The case became less about evidence and more about emotion. The public didn't just want answers, they demanded them. And the image of that grieving family burned itself into everyone's memory. But while the family's pleas moved hearts, they did not move the investigation forward. The mystery only deepened. At first, the community stood united behind the missing trooper's family. Everyone wanted to believe he had been taken, that something terrible beyond his control had happened. But as the weeks passed with no answers, whispers began to spread. Some people quietly asked the question no one wanted to say out loud. What if he wasn't a victim at all? What if he left on his own? The idea was shocking. Why would a respected officer, a father, a husband, just walk away? But the longer the silence dragged on, the more people started to wonder. A few locals claimed they had seen him looking stressed in the days before he vanished. Others swore he had argued with fellow officers. None of these stories were confirmed, but they spread fast, especially through small-town gossip. The newspapers picked it up. One headline read, "Trooper vanished, but did he leave willingly?" The suggestion was enough to stir anger. His wife appeared on television again, furious at the rumors. She said her husband would never abandon his children, never fake his disappearance. But the doubts were already out there, and once rumors start, they are hard to stop. Even inside the department, cracks appeared. Some officers whispered among themselves. Maybe he had debts. Maybe he had a secret life. Maybe he just couldn't take the pressure anymore. Nobody said it publicly, but suspicions quietly spread. Detectives looked for proof. They went through his bank accounts, his phone records, even personal letters. Nothing suggested he had planned to run. His paychecks were untouched. His bills were paid. There was no hidden life, no secret girlfriend, no debts. On paper, he was exactly who everyone thought he was. But facts didn't stop the gossip. People preferred theories over silence, and the silence was deafening. One retired officer told a reporter he wouldn't be surprised if the trooper had staged it all. Another neighbor said she believed he was kidnapped. Both comments aired on the evening news back to back, leaving viewers torn between two completely different stories. The family suffered the most. His wife avoided grocery stores to escape the stares and whispers. The children were teased at school, classmates repeating what their parents had said at home. Some kids asked them, "Is your dad a crook?" The cruelty left scars. Detectives hated the rumors, but even they couldn't fully ignore them. The clean scene, the missing body, the lack of clues, it all made sense if he had walked away. But deep down, many knew it didn't fit. The trooper had left everything behind. His car, his weapon, his career, his family. That wasn't a man running away. That was a man who had been stopped. Still, whispers grew louder with every passing month. Community trust began to fade. Some citizens turned their suspicion on the police department itself. Maybe they were hiding something. Maybe the story was bigger than anyone admitted. By the end of the summer, the case was no longer just a mystery. It was a war of theories. Was he kidnapped, murdered, or had he walked into the night by choice? Nobody had answers. All they had were rumors. And those rumors would haunt the case for years. By the end of the first month, the case had grown far beyond the small community. Newspapers across the state splashed the trooper's face on their front pages. His photo in uniform appeared above bold headlines. Trooper vanishes without a trace, and mystery of the empty patrol car. Every detail, no matter how small, was printed. His last radio call, the search efforts, his wife's plea, all became part of the public record. Readers followed the story like it was a crime novel. Each morning, families opened their papers to see if new answers had appeared. Soon, the story spread beyond the state. National outlets picked it up, calling it one of the strangest disappearances in law enforcement history. Reporters from out of town crowded the roadside, interviewing locals who had nothing new to add but were eager to be part of the moment. Detectives felt the pressure building. Every press conference was filled with cameras and flashing lights. Questions flew at them. Was it foul play? Was it an inside job? Why hadn't they found the body? Detectives repeated the same lines. We're following all leads. We're doing everything possible. But behind the scenes, they knew they were spinning in circles. Headlines didn't just inform people. They shaped the narrative. One paper suggested the trooper had been targeted by criminals. Another hinted at betrayal within the force. A third focused on the family's pain. Each version made the case look different, and the public didn't know which to believe. The family, once private, now lived under a spotlight. Journalists waited outside their home, snapping photos when they left for school or church. The wife, already broken, now had to carry herself in front of an audience that judged her every move. Detectives complained that the press coverage made their job harder. False tips poured in, inspired by stories people read. One caller swore he saw the trooper in another state. Another claimed he was being held in a cabin. Each lead wasted hours, sometimes days, but they had to check them all. Still, the case was now too big to ignore. The governor made statements. State police leaders promised justice. And the pressure on detectives grew heavier with every unanswered headline. The missing trooper wasn't just a man anymore. He was a symbol. And that meant failure was not an option. At first, the case burned hot. Detectives worked around the clock. Every new tip was chased with urgency. Every rumor was taken seriously. But as the months dragged on, energy faded. By the end of the first year, there were no answers, no new evidence. The search areas had been covered dozens of times. Files stacked up inside the command post, but none of them brought detectives closer to the truth. The case grew heavier with every failure. Detectives were rotated in and out, fresh eyes brought to spark new ideas. But each time the cycle repeated. Review the notes, recheck the scene, interview the same witnesses. The result never changed. Nothing. Leads slowed. The public grew tired. What was once a daily front-page story became a small column buried deep inside the newspaper. People still whispered about it, but the urgency was gone. Other tragedies took its place. The trooper's name, once on everyone's lips, began to fade. Inside the department, morale dropped. Some officers admitted privately they no longer believed the case would be solved. Others said they hated even driving past the spot on the highway. It felt cursed, like a scar that refused to heal. The family refused to give up. The wife continued to call detectives, asking for updates, pressing for answers. But too often the response was the same. We're doing what we can. She knew it meant nothing new had been found. The children grew older, their memories of their father frozen at the age he had disappeared. For them, birthdays, graduations, and milestones came without him. They lived with questions nobody could answer. By the mid-1980s, the case file was moved to cold storage. Technically, it was still active. Officially, detectives insisted it hadn't been forgotten. But the truth was clear. The case was no longer a priority. New crimes demanded attention. New victims filled the headlines. The missing trooper became yesterday's story. A few dedicated investigators still pulled out the file from time to time. They reread the notes, hoping something might jump out. They compared the case to new missing persons, hoping for a connection. But every effort ended the same way it always had. No answers. The silence was brutal. Without evidence, without leads, there was nothing left to chase. And so slowly, the case slipped into the shadows. For the family, the pain never went cold. But for the world outside, the mystery of the vanished trooper became just another unsolved story. When the case dragged with no answers, whispers began to grow louder. People said maybe this wasn't random at all. Maybe someone had been waiting. The missing officer had spent years pulling over cars, breaking up fights, and arresting criminals. He'd taken drugs off the street, sent men to jail, and stood in court to testify against them. Each time he did, he made enemies. Detectives asked, what if one of those enemies decided to get even? They went back through his case files. Every arrest, every angry suspect. They pulled out thick folders filled with mugshots and reports. Some of the names jumped off the page. There was a man who once threatened the officer in open court. Another had been caught by him 3 times, each time angrier than before. A third had spent years in prison because of his testimony. Detectives began chasing those names. They went out to knock on doors. They searched homes. They asked endless questions. But nothing fit. The man who once threatened him, he had a solid alibi. He was hundreds of miles away when the officer vanished. The repeat offender, he had been picked up on a small charge the same night and was sitting in a county jail cell when it happened. The one who had gone to prison, he was still locked up, nowhere near the scene. One by one, the suspects fell away. Still, the whispers didn't stop. People said the crime felt too clean, too fast, too professional. Someone must have planned it. Detectives even checked with prison officials. Maybe word had gone out to take care of the officer. Maybe an order was passed to people on the outside. But again, no evidence surfaced. Every suspect had some story that held up. Every possible lead ended in nothing. It was like chasing smoke. By the end, detectives realized something chilling. If this really had been revenge, then whoever pulled it off left not a single trace. And that kind of enemy was more terrifying than anyone wanted to admit. When the revenge angle stalled, detectives shifted to something else. What if he wasn't killed at all? What if he was still alive, taken somewhere, hidden away, waiting for rescue? The idea spread fast. Families clung to it because it meant hope. His wife went on television saying, "If you're out there, we'll find you. We won't stop." Detectives began looking for signs of a kidnapping. They searched old barns, abandoned houses, empty shacks deep in the woods. Every broken-down building became suspicious. Helicopters scanned fields. Troopers walked through swamps. Dogs sniffed the ground for any scent. The theory gained more weight because of how his car was found. The cruiser was neat. No struggle, no blood, no fight. It almost looked like he had stepped out on his own. Maybe someone had forced him. Maybe they used a gun. Maybe they lured him out with a fake call. Detectives imagined he could be tied up somewhere, waiting. Every time someone reported strange noises from an old building, police raced out. Every time a farmer saw movement in a barn, they checked. But it was always nothing, just wind, animals, or shadows. Weeks turned into months, and still no ransom note, no phone call, no demand. That was the part detectives couldn't explain. Kidnappers usually wanted something: money, release of a prisoner, attention. But here, there was silence. The family still believed. His children even said they dreamed of him coming home one day. Neighbors put candles in their windows as a sign of hope. But behind closed doors, detectives admitted the truth. If he had been kidnapped, he should have surfaced by now. The longer it went on, the less likely it was. And yet, the theory never fully died. Because the idea of him being out there, alive, somewhere, was easier to hold onto than the alternative. As the years dragged on, the case became part of local legend, and with each passing year, another phone call seemed to come in. A hunter walking through the woods would stumble across a set of bones. A hiker deep on a trail would find a skull. A farmer clearing land would dig up something buried. Each time panic spread. People whispered, "This has to be him." Detectives rushed to the scenes. They taped off the areas, called in experts, and carefully collected the remains. The first set came just 1 year after the trooper vanished. A hunter in the mountains stumbled on bones under a tree. They were old, scattered, and weathered. Detectives held their breath. But when the lab results came back, the answer crushed them. The bones were not human. They belonged to a deer. Months later, hikers in a neighboring county found another skeleton. This one was human. Detectives rushed out. Families waited by their phones. Again, disappointment. The bones were from an old burial site, decades before the trooper had even been born. This same cycle happened again and again. One fall, workers clearing brush near a riverbank found part of a skull. Another time, children exploring a cave came across a bone. Every time the call went out, "Maybe this is finally him." Every time the results were the same, "Not him." For detectives, it was exhausting. They couldn't ignore any lead. They had to treat every discovery as if it might solve the case. For the family, it was even worse. Each new report ripped open the wound again. Each test result slammed it shut. Years later, bones turned up in an abandoned well. People in town held their breath. The lab revealed it was another missing person, but not the trooper. By then, the cruel pattern had become almost predictable. The woods kept giving up skeletons, but never the one everyone was searching for. Each failure made the case feel colder, emptier, and more hopeless. And yet, whenever bones were found, the same question always echoed. Could this be the moment we finally know the truth? It never was. Not everyone believed the case was random. Some officers swore there were signs, clues no one listened to at the time. One retired officer finally spoke up years later. He said the missing trooper had confided something strange before that last shift. According to him, the trooper felt like he was being followed. He didn't give details, just said he'd noticed the same car more than once, parked down the street, sitting at odd places on his patrol route. The retired officer said he brushed it off at the time. Cops often feel watched. They make enemies. Paranoia comes with the badge. But looking back, he swore the trooper was serious. He had a gut feeling someone was out there, keeping tabs on him. Investigators later tried to track this claim. What car had he seen? What color? What model? The officer couldn't remember. Too much time had passed. But the idea stuck. If he really was being shadowed, then the night he vanished might not have been chance. It could have been planned. Someone waiting for the right moment. As the years went on, suspicion began turning inward. At first, detectives looked only at criminals, drug dealers, smugglers, angry ex-cons. But the deeper they dug, the more a darker theory spread. Maybe the danger had come from inside the force. It was an idea no one wanted to say out loud. Cops protect their own. Suggesting that one trooper might harm another was almost unthinkable. Still, the whispers grew. Some detectives quietly admitted that the missing trooper had rubbed a few people the wrong way. He was strict, by the book, and never looked the other way. That kind of attitude made enemies, not just among criminals but among fellow officers too. Rumors swirled about disputes inside the department, arguments over cases, tensions during shifts. At least one officer, years later, hinted that the missing trooper had been too honest, maybe too honest for his own safety. So detectives began investigating their own. They pulled phone records, looked at shift logs, and questioned troopers about where they had been that night. It was awkward. These were men in the same uniform. They ate together, worked together, trusted each other with their lives. Now suddenly they were suspects. But nothing solid ever came out of it. No hidden messages, no strange money trail, no officer caught in a lie. Each time suspicion landed on someone, the evidence fell apart. Still, the rumor never died. Even years later, some locals swore the trooper's death wasn't about criminals at all. They believed someone in uniform wanted him gone, and that a cover-up kept the truth buried. Detectives officially found nothing, but the suspicion lingered like a shadow the department could never shake. For the family, life without answers was torture. His wife refused to believe he'd simply walked away. She held on to the memory of the man she knew, devoted, responsible, steady. But doubt crept in from every corner. Neighbors whispered, headlines speculated. Even some officers quietly suggested maybe he'd left on his own. The wife fought back against those ideas, but deep down, the uncertainty gnawed at her. What if he had chosen to disappear? What if she and the kids had been abandoned? For the children, the years were even harder. They grew up with questions instead of memories. At school, other kids would ask, "Where's your dad?" They never had an answer. Every knock on the door, every ringing phone carried a pulse of hope and dread. Maybe it was news. Maybe good, maybe bad, but it was never him. The family lived trapped between two painful worlds. If he had been murdered, then justice was missing. If he had run away, then love was missing. Neither answer brought peace. At home, the absence was everywhere. The trooper's chair at the dinner table sat empty. His uniform still hung in the closet, but no one dared to move it. Birthdays came and went. The kids would blow out candles, but the seat where their dad should have been was always bare. His wife tried to smile for them, but her eyes often filled with tears. Holidays were worse. While other families gathered around the tree or carved a turkey, theirs felt broken. His voice, his laugh, his presence, gone. The silence was louder than anything. Neighbors tried to help. They dropped off food, offered to watch the kids, checked in often. But the pain couldn't be erased. The children asked questions their mother couldn't answer. When is Daddy coming home? Why can't they find him? As the years passed, those questions turned into anger. One child grew quiet, shutting out friends. Another acted out at school, getting into fights. The shadow of not knowing crushed them in different ways. The wife clung to hope, refusing to say he was gone. She kept a light on at night just in case. But deep down, she carried the weight of reality. He wasn't coming back. The missing trooper was more than just a husband and father. He was the center of their lives. And with him gone, every day was a reminder of what they'd lost. By the mid-1980s, the investigation had slowed to nothing. At first, detectives had chased every tip. They interviewed hundreds, searched rivers, and rechecked the stretch of highway again and again. But time wore them down. Years after the vanishing, leads dried up. Detectives were rotated out, retiring or moving to other cases. New officers were assigned, but they didn't have the same fire. To them, this was just an old file with too many dead ends. Inside the department, the case became a sore subject. Some believed he had been murdered. Others quietly suggested he had left on his own. The lack of proof made every theory possible, and none of them satisfying. By 1985, the official decision was made. The trooper's case would be marked inactive. It didn't mean it was forgotten, only that detectives would no longer work it day to day. If a new lead came in, they'd reopen it. But until then, it sat in a drawer gathering dust. The family was crushed. For them, the search never ended. But for the department, the case had slipped into history. As years went by, a painful idea started spreading inside the department. Some officers, in hushed voices, suggested the trooper hadn't been taken at all. They thought he might have run. The theory was simple. Maybe the pressure of the badge had finally broken him. Maybe he drove off that night, left his car behind, and walked away from his life. Not everyone believed it, but the whispers grew. Old arguments and tensions were pulled out as evidence. A few officers recalled him being tired, stressed, maybe carrying more than he showed. Others swore he had debts, though no proof was ever found. The thought of abandonment cut deep. To his family, it was a cruel suggestion. His wife defended him fiercely, saying he would never leave his children. But in locker rooms and late-night shifts, some officers doubted. The force became divided. One side stood by him, convinced he had been ambushed or trapped. The other side thought the mystery had a simpler answer, one that pointed to betrayal. These quiet divisions never made the newspapers, but they poisoned the department. Instead of unity, suspicion took root, and for those who had once trusted him like a brother, the possibility of abandonment hurt more than death. For many officers, the idea of abandonment was unbearable. They refused to believe it. To them, the trooper was still a brother in arms, a man who had stood shoulder to shoulder with them in danger. Instead of anger, they carried guilt. They replayed that night in their heads over and over. What did they miss? What clues slipped past them? Could they have searched harder? Some troopers confessed years later that the case haunted them. One said he still dreamed of the flashing patrol lights, empty in the dark. Another remembered hearing dogs bark into the woods but finding nothing. Those memories never left. They felt they had failed one of their own. The brotherhood of the badge was supposed to mean protection, loyalty, and trust. Yet somehow, a trooper had disappeared on their watch. The guilt only grew as time passed. When the case was marked inactive, some officers felt like they were betraying him again, closing the door when he still needed them. The story became a ghost that lived inside the department. The missing trooper was no longer just a case file. He was a reminder that even the strongest brotherhood could crack under the weight of mystery. By the mid-1980s, the case had slipped from headlines, but it never left the town's memory. People carried the story with them everywhere. At diners, the trooper's name was whispered over morning coffee. At bars, locals argued about what really happened to him. Some swore he had been murdered. Others leaned toward the idea that he walked away. Nobody truly knew, but everyone had an opinion. For children, it became almost like a campfire tale. Parents warned them not to wander at night, telling them about the trooper who disappeared. Teenagers dared each other to drive down the lonely stretch of highway where his car was found. They told stories of seeing flashing lights that weren't there. The mystery gave the town an uneasy identity. Outsiders came in and asked, "Isn't this the place where that trooper vanished?" People nodded, sometimes with pride, sometimes with shame. Even teachers and coaches mentioned it when trying to explain danger or loyalty. The story became woven into everyday life, shaping how people thought about safety, trust, and fear. The trooper wasn't just a missing officer anymore. He had become a ghost story, a warning that even those sworn to protect could vanish into the night. What no one realized was the cruelest part of all. While the town whispered, his body had never been far. In 1979, when he disappeared, search teams had stormed through fields, forests, and rivers. They looked everywhere but missed one spot, a sealed service tunnel hidden near the highway. For 15 years, people drove past that road every single day. Families packed into cars, heading to school, work, and church. Children looked out the windows, never knowing their town's greatest mystery was right below them. Construction workers walked the ground above. Troopers patrolled the same stretch of highway where one of their own had vanished. But no one thought to open the tunnel. The silence of that place held the answer, but time kept moving. Generations grew up with questions. The family cried themselves to sleep, only feet from the truth. Detectives retired, believing the case might never be solved. The cruel irony was unbearable. For 15 long years, the missing trooper rested in the darkness, sealed away, while the world carried on above him, never knowing. It was 1994, 15 years after the trooper vanished. On the edge of the highway, a construction crew arrived for what seemed like a normal day. Their job was simple: clear out some land, prep it for a new project, and make sure the ground was safe. The men worked with machines, breaking up old concrete, digging into dirt, and hauling debris away. Nothing about it felt unusual. They had done this kind of work 100 times before. But then one of the machines hit something hard beneath the ground. At first, the crew thought it was just old stone or junk left from the past. When they dug closer, they saw a sealed opening, an old service tunnel that had been closed off for decades. Most of the workers had never even heard of it. The tunnel wasn't marked on their maps. It looked like something abandoned long ago and forgotten. They broke open the barrier and peered inside. The air that rushed out was stale and heavy, like a place that hadn't breathed in years. It seemed like nothing more than a hidden passage, but as they shined their flashlights inside, they felt a strange chill. Something waited in the darkness. The workers stepped into the tunnel, their boots crunching over loose rubble. The space was narrow, cold, and silent. Dust hung in the air. They aimed their flashlights ahead, sweeping across cracked walls and broken pipes. At first, it just looked empty, just another forgotten structure buried under the road. Then one of the beams stopped. A shape lay against the ground. At first, they thought it was trash, maybe old clothing left behind. But as they stepped closer, the outline became clear. Bones. Scattered across the dirt floor were human remains. The workers froze, their lights shaking as they realized what they were looking at. Next to the bones was something even more chilling, a rusted police belt, the kind only troopers wore. One man whispered that it had to be a joke. Maybe someone had dumped props inside years ago, but the silence and the details told a different story. The belt was real, the bones were real, and the story every local knew, the story of the missing trooper, suddenly came rushing back. Terrified, the crew backed out of the tunnel and called the police. The mystery that had haunted the town for 15 years was about to explode back to life. At first, the workers don't understand what they're looking at. The bones could have been anyone's. An old vagrant, a forgotten accident, maybe even an animal. But then, one of the men crouches near the rubble. He brushes away dirt with his hand. Something hard and cold glints under the beam of his flashlight. It's a piece of metal, round with edges eaten away by time. The man squints, then his breath catches. It's a badge. Right beside it, half buried in the dust, are scraps of dark fabric, torn, stiff, and covered in years of grime. The workers freeze. Everyone in the state knows what this means. Badges like this don't just end up in tunnels. They belong to one group of people, police. The men step back, their voices rising in panic. The pieces click together in their minds. Bones, a badge, a uniform. They aren't standing over some stranger. They're standing over one of their own state troopers. Phones come out fast. Calls are made. Within minutes, the story spreads beyond the worksite. The chilling truth hits them all at once. The missing trooper may have finally been found. The call goes out, and it doesn't take long. Marked cars with flashing lights pull up beside the construction site. The sealed tunnel is now the center of attention. Officers step out, their faces tense. Some are younger, too young to remember the disappearance firsthand. But others, the veterans, go pale. They've lived with this mystery for decades. Now it feels like the past has finally caught up. The tunnel is sealed off with tape. Reporters hover nearby, already whispering what this could mean. Inside, forensics crews move carefully. No one touches anything until it's photographed. Every bone is marked, measured, and bagged. Tiny fragments of the uniform are lifted gently into evidence containers. Then comes the belt, rusted, broken in spots, but still recognizable. They find the holster empty, the weapon long gone. And the badge, it's placed into its own container, handled with special care. The workers stand back, still shaken. They never expected their job to turn into something this heavy. For the officers, it's even worse. Each item they see confirms it. This isn't just a skeleton. This is one of their own, gone for more than a decade. Some stare at the ground, unable to speak. Others whisper to each other, trying to make sense of it. Finally, the reality sets in. After all these years, the trooper has been found. But the discovery brings no comfort, only more questions. The evidence bags are carried away to the state lab. For weeks, experts run tests. They check the teeth, the bones, the scraps of clothing. The badge number is traced. Finally, the results come back. There's no doubt. The remains belong to the trooper who vanished 15 years earlier. The news spreads fast through the department. Some officers sit in silence. Others curse under their breath. The case they thought would never end has suddenly given them an answer, but it's an answer that feels like a punch to the chest. The hardest part is telling the family. Detectives drive out to the trooper's old home. His wife, now older, greets them at the door. She already knows. The sight of the uniforms, the look on their faces, it tells her before they even speak. Inside, they explain. The remains found in the tunnel belong to her husband. After all these years, the search is over. She cries, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that won't stop. The children, now grown, sit stunned. They spent their lives waiting for a father who would never walk back through the door. The confirmation closes the mystery of where he went, but it rips open the deeper wound. Why it happened. The moment the state police announced the identification, Chaos follows. News cameras rush to the site of the tunnel. Helicopters circle overhead. Reporters crowd near the caution tape, shouting questions no one can answer. Headlines run across every paper and TV screen. Missing trooper found after 15 years. At the diner downtown, customers huddle around the television. At schools, teachers whisper about it in the hallways. The entire town buzzes with one story: the ghost of the trooper has finally come home. But there's no relief. If anything, the discovery creates even more tension. Everyone asks the same thing: how did he end up in a sealed tunnel? Some think it was an accident, that maybe he chased someone inside, got trapped and never escaped. Others believe it's darker. They whisper about betrayal, about enemies, about someone making sure he never got out. Detectives reopen the case with full force. Old files are dusted off. Witnesses are tracked down. Retired officers are called back for questioning. For the first time in years, the story that had gone silent is alive again. But this time, the eyes of the entire state are watching, waiting for the truth. The mystery isn't solved. It has only gotten louder. The bones are laid out on stainless steel tables. Forensic experts move slowly, checking every piece. Right away, they notice something unusual. There are no bullet holes in the bones, no fractures that look like blunt force trauma. The skull is intact. The ribs show no signs of being stabbed. If this trooper was murdered, the body carries no scars of violence. His gun is also found inside the tunnel. The holster is closed, the weapon never fired. That tells detectives something big. If danger came, he never even had time to react. They check his radio. It's damaged, but not from a fight, more like years of sitting in damp air. His notebook is ruined, the ink gone, but still it's all there. Forensics take samples of dirt, clothing fibers, and even insect remains. They test everything. Slowly, a picture forms. This was not a battlefield. It was a prison. The trooper didn't die fighting someone. He died trapped. But how? The tunnel was sealed. Who closed it? Why was he inside in the first place? The body tells them what didn't happen. Now detectives must figure out what did. Detectives dig into old records. The tunnel was built decades earlier, running under a busy stretch of highway. It was supposed to help with drainage and maintenance. But soon, it had another purpose. During the 1920s, bootleggers used it to move alcohol during Prohibition. Later, smugglers used it for stolen goods. Local cops knew about it, but it was impossible to guard every inch. By the 1960s, the tunnel was abandoned. Concrete blocks were placed at the entrances. By 1979, most people had forgotten it even existed. Most people, but not everyone. Detectives realized criminals likely still knew about it. The spot was hidden, out of sight, and rarely visited. Perfect for someone who wanted to stash things or people. So the question becomes chilling. Did someone lure the trooper inside? Or did he stumble onto something he wasn't supposed to see? The tunnel had been sitting under the town the whole time, holding its secret. Families drove over it. Kids rode bikes above it, never knowing a missing officer was right beneath their wheels. And now, 15 years later, the tunnel is telling its story. Detectives begin to put the pieces together. They think back to the night the trooper vanished. His last radio call sounded normal, but what if something caught his eye just after? The theory grows. Maybe he saw suspicious activity near the highway, a strange car parked where it shouldn't be, or a figure moving quickly into the trees. He was a state trooper. His duty was to check it out, so he likely pulled off the road and followed. His flashlight in one hand, radio at his side, he may have trailed someone through the brush. The chase could have led him to the tunnel entrance. At night in the dark, the tunnel would have looked like nothing more than a black hole in the earth. Still, if he thought a suspect was hiding inside, he had no choice but to go in. Investigators picture it, the sound of his boots echoing off damp walls, the light from his flashlight bouncing ahead. Maybe he called out, ordering whoever was inside to stop. But inside the tunnel, the air was heavy, the path twisted, and without knowing it, he had walked straight into a trap. When workers opened the tunnel, they noticed something important. The exit wasn't just closed. It was sealed tight with thick concrete barriers. Whoever put them there wanted to make sure no one could get out. Forensics confirmed the trooper had been trapped alive. There were no signs of violence. His gun never left the holster. That meant the enemy wasn't a person with a weapon. The enemy was the wall itself. Detectives believe the trooper entered the tunnel chasing someone. But once inside, the way out behind him was blocked. Whether it was done before or after he stepped in, no one knows. He may have turned and realized the terrible truth. There was no exit. The air inside was damp and stale. Water dripped from the ceiling. There was no food, no light, no way to call for help. His radio may have failed to reach outside. Slowly, the horrifying reality set in. The trooper wasn't murdered in a fight. He wasn't kidnapped and taken away. He was sealed alive beneath his own town. Above ground, his family searched. Helicopters circled. Officers shouted his name. But all the while, he was only yards away and no one could hear him. When forensic teams studied the tunnel closely, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Along the concrete walls were deep scratch marks. They weren't random. They were made by human hands, dragging, clawing, desperate to break free. The marks showed that the trooper had realized his fate. He tried everything he could to escape. Investigators found spots where his flashlight had been slammed against the wall, maybe in anger, maybe as a tool to chip away. The flashlight itself was recovered. Its battery had long since gone dead, but the casing told a story. It had been gripped until the very end. Experts believe he paced the tunnel, testing every corner for weakness. His sidearm was still holstered, untouched. He wasn't in a fight with an enemy. His battle was against time, air, and concrete. The scratches made detectives pause. They weren't just marks. They were proof of his last hours alive. Each line carved into the wall was like a message. I was here. I tried to survive. It told investigators what the trooper couldn't say. He hadn't abandoned his family. He hadn't run away. He had fought until his strength gave out. The truth of his final moments crushed everyone who heard it. The tunnel sat only feet beneath the surface. Above, cars drove along the highway. People walked nearby. Life went on. But down below, a state trooper was trapped, calling into the dark. Detectives believe he shouted for help until his voice was gone. The tunnel walls were thick, swallowing sound. No one could hear him. His uniform, still on his bones, showed he never gave up his role. Even in his last hours, he remained a trooper waiting for rescue, hoping someone would find him. But no one came. Time passed. His flashlight died. His radio gave out. The air grew colder. Slowly, his body weakened. He sat in the dark, just yards from the world he served, and slipped into silence. When investigators shared this with his family, the pain was overwhelming. His wife cried knowing he had been so close. His children, now grown, pictured their father calling for them in vain. The most haunting part, for 15 years the answer had been right there. The tunnel became his grave, and no one above had any idea. For 15 years the trooper's wife and children lived in torment. Every day was a question without an answer. Was he alive? Did he walk away? Or was he killed and buried somewhere unknown? Now for the first time they knew the truth. The remains brought back to them were his. A badge, a sidearm, a uniform and bones that confirmed the unthinkable. Their husband and father had been there all along, trapped beneath the earth. The family was finally able to claim his body, but with those answers came a flood of pain. His wife had grown older alone. His children had grown up without him. They began to prepare for a funeral. They had prayed they'd never have to hold. The funeral drew hundreds. Police cars lined the roads leading to the church. Their flashing lights stayed silent, glowing red and blue as a mark of respect. Officers stood in crisp uniforms, saluting as the casket draped in the American flag was carried past. Flags across the state were lowered to half-mast. Inside the church, his wife clutched a folded flag, tears streaming down her face. His children, now adults, sat in silence, their grief plain for all to see. They had waited most of their lives for this moment, and it was nothing like they imagined. The governor spoke, calling him a hero who gave his life in service. Fellow troopers spoke about the night he vanished and the endless years of searching. Finally, the family watched as the casket was lowered into the ground. A bugle played taps. The final sound echoed across the cemetery, sharp and final. The man who had vanished without a trace was finally home. Even after the burial, the case haunted the detectives. They admitted it was one of the most painful mysteries they had ever faced. What broke them most was not just that he died, it was how. He had been so close to rescue, just beneath the surface, calling, scratching, fighting to survive. The thought that no one heard him, that for 15 years people drove over the very spot while he lay below, was unbearable. The detectives confessed they would never stop thinking about him. For the small town, the truth was almost impossible to process. For years, the story of the vanished trooper had been told like a ghost story. Kids whispered it in schools. Adults shook their heads at the mystery. Now they learned he had been right there, hidden inside a sealed tunnel under the very highway many drove every day. People began gathering at the site. Some left flowers. Others stood silently, staring at the ground, thinking about all the times they had unknowingly passed over him. The discovery hit everyone with the same chilling thought. If this could happen to a trained officer, it could happen to anyone. The town would never forget. As the investigation wrapped up, one question refused to go away. How could this tunnel have been overlooked for 15 years? Search teams back in 1979 had used helicopters, dogs, and dozens of officers. They had searched rivers, forests, and empty barns, but no one thought to check the sealed service tunnel, sitting right below the highway where the trooper disappeared. For the community, the tunnel became a symbol of failure. Every crack in its walls, every sealed barrier reminded people of the oversight that left a man to die in silence. Officers admitted privately that they had driven past the spot thousands of times over the years. Families in town realized they had walked and lived their lives just above his hidden grave. The tunnel became more than a crime scene. It became a reminder that even with all the resources, all the manpower, the system had failed. The story closed with one final truth. The trooper hadn't vanished into thin air. He hadn't run away. He hadn't been murdered in some distant field. He had been right there all along, just beneath the surface. For 15 years, the truth lay sealed in darkness while people searched everywhere else. Detectives, neighbors, and even his own family passed over him again and again, never knowing. It was a chilling reminder of how fragile life is, and how sometimes the answers we're desperate for are hidden right under our feet, waiting to be uncovered too late.